Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Retired attorney David Boyer defends his Texas ranch from an overreaching HOA led by Karen Welch, who forges documents to claim access to his land. After legal battles, trespassing, and uncovering fraud, David wins in court, restores peace, and reclaims control of his land. It was early spring when I first got the sense that peace had an expiration date. My name is David Boyer. I'm 51, a retired federal attorney who spent the better part of 25 years dealing with land disputes, boundary issues, and the kind of bureaucratic warfare that turns neighbors into enemies. After retirement, I wasn't looking for peace. I was looking for control. Control over my land, my time, and my damn surroundings. That's why I bought this ranch. 180 acres of raw Texas land up in the hills near the lake, fully fenced, gated, and off-grid. Solar panels, diesel generator backup, underground water from a private well, and a perimeter defense system that would make Fort Knox blush. There wasn't a single HOA regulation within miles, or so I thought. The only neighboring development was a glossy little suburban tumor called Hickory View Estates. You know the type. Identical homes with beige stucco and plastic smiles, managed by retirees with nothing better to do than weaponize their bylaws. I didn't think much of them. My land didn't touch theirs directly. There was a wide ravine and a tree line between us, like nature's own ceasefire agreement. But as with all things HOA, boundaries are only a suggestion. The first sign of trouble came on a Saturday morning. I was out checking the western fence line, standard post-storm routine, when I noticed a pair of strangers walking along the ridge trail just inside my property. They weren't hikers. One had a clipboard. The other had a camera slung over his shoulder. They didn't see me at first, and I watched them jotting notes and pointing at the tree line like they were planning a goddamn subdivision. I stepped into view and called out, "You two planning to build a strip mall or just casing the place for fun?" They froze. The one with the clipboard said something about being just from the HOA and how they were scouting an access option. I didn't reply. I pointed to the nearest fence post where a metal sign read, "Private property. No entry without warrant." Then I pointed at the path they'd just taken to get in. They left without argument. That was the first knock. The second came a week later, and this time it was a full parade. Late afternoon, just before sunset, I was sipping coffee on the wraparound porch when I heard tires crunching gravel at the western gate. Not many people come that way. It's a long dead end with a chain across it. But there they were. 4 SUVs, spotless and suburban. I grabbed the binoculars off the hook and zoomed in. Leading the pack was a woman I recognized from the HOA newsletter that occasionally blew onto my land like invasive species. Her name was Karen Welch. 60-ish, platinum hair lacquered into submission, khakis pressed so tight they could have been engineered. She was flanked by 5 others, 3 men in polos, 2 women with iPads. They were standing outside the gate like it was a customs checkpoint, and they had somewhere important to be. I walked down slow, took my time, let them wait. When I reached the gate, Karen greeted me like she was offering me the cure for cancer. "Mr. Boyer, we've come to discuss a small matter regarding the community." "Funny," I said. "I don't recall being part of one." Karen smiled like a shark that spotted blood. "Oh, no. You're not, technically. But your land lies adjacent to Hickory View, and we've had several residents express concern over your western boundary, particularly the shoreline access." "You mean my shoreline?" She gave a dismissive wave, as if the distinction were petty. "It affects our community's connectivity and cohesion. There used to be a walking trail." "There's never been a trail here," I cut in. "And even if there was, it would have died of old age by now. What exactly do you want?" Karen stepped forward, all charm and poison. "We'd like to inspect the corner where your land touches the lake. There's potential for a shared easement that would benefit both your property and the community." I leaned on the gate and smiled back, no less shark-like. "That corner's fenced, signed, and under surveillance. You set foot past this gate, and you're trespassing. And if you send any more of your clipboard bandits into my woods, I'll file a criminal complaint before you can say community standards." Karen didn't flinch. "You can't deny access to a community landmark." "I don't have to deny it," I said. "It was never yours." There was a pause. She stared at me like she was reading my obituary in advance. Then, with a smooth voice, she said something that set the whole fire in motion. "You may think this land is yours, Mr. Boyer, but property that affects the community's visual and recreational continuity is subject to review. We're not asking. We're informing. I laughed once, short and cold. Then consider yourself informed in return. You step 1 inch onto my land again without a warrant, and it won't be a conversation. It'll be an arrest. She turned back to her group, huffed, and muttered something about calling the county. The whole convoy reversed slowly and disappeared back toward their kingdom of symmetry. I stood there for a minute, watching the sun dip behind the ridge. The wind was still, but I knew the air was shifting. Something had been set in motion, and whatever it wasn't going to stop at polite conversation. It started with a manila envelope. I found it wedged in my mailbox on a Wednesday morning. No postage, no courier sticker, just my name typed neatly on the front, like someone had dropped it off personally. I knew what it was before I even opened it. You spend a few decades working federal cases, and your skin develops a radar for paperwork meant to ruin your week. I peeled it open at the kitchen counter while the coffee machine hissed behind me. Inside, a formal notice of civil action filed by the Hickory View Estates Homeowners Association. Their claim? That I was unreasonably restricting historic community access to shared recreational shoreline resources and creating artificial barriers that degrade community cohesion and property values. I read that line twice and had to laugh. These people actually claimed that my fence, a legal, surveyed, signed, and recorded perimeter, was somehow an affront to their suburban utopia. But the cherry on top was the demand. They wanted a permanent easement through the southwestern edge of my land and access to legacy infrastructure, which, in this case, was apparently my generator pole. Let me be clear, the public pole they referenced was a diesel-fed backup generator I had installed 10 years ago on my land, with permits at my expense and used solely for my ranch operations. It wasn't connected to anything outside the property. But that didn't stop them from pretending it powered half the damn neighborhood. They included a blurry photocopy of a map from the early 90s, showing a shaded dotted line cutting diagonally through the corner of my acreage, labeled Future Shared Access Corridor. I'd seen the same map before, one of many speculative zoning drafts from a failed expansion plan that never made it past the Planning Commission. And this one, interestingly, had several features that didn't match the official records. At first, I figured it was a bluff. HOA lawsuits are usually bark without bite. They try to scare you into compliance with some nuisance claim, hoping you'll roll over to avoid legal bills. Problem is, they didn't realize they picked the wrong ex-attorney to rattle. I called the county recorder's office and got a certified copy of my parcel history. Sure enough, there was no legal easement, past or present, recorded on or against my property. No community right-of-way, no public utility access, no legacy shoreline corridor. The corner of my land they wanted had been fenced, maintained, and patrolled since I bought it. In fact, my predecessor had posted no trespassing signs there for years. If anything, the only legacy involved was that this land had always said, "Stay the hell out." But I wasn't about to rest on just county documents. I spent the rest of the day digging into old zoning records, survey maps, and property assessments. The deeper I went, the more it stank. The public map attached to the lawsuit didn't match any of the official documents I pulled. The parcel numbers were correct, but the lot shapes were slightly altered. Property lines had been nudged just enough to suggest ambiguity. There were initials scrawled in one corner, fake-looking, and a seal that was either outdated or forged. My bet was on both. I made high-res scans of everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had doctored the map to create a fake access path and attached it to an actual legal filing, which meant someone had committed fraud in an attempt to forcibly acquire access to my land. That was no longer a nuisance lawsuit. That was a criminal predicate. I called a friend, Jessica Rain, an active land use attorney in Austin I'd mentored years ago. I asked her to review the HOA's complaint purely as a second opinion. Half an hour later, she called me back. "David," she said, "this is garbage. Half of this is speculative wording. The other half is borderline fiction. They reference a community access agreement that doesn't exist. This wouldn't pass a first-year law review." "You see the map?" I asked. "Yeah," she replied. "Not only is it fake, but it's clumsy. Whoever edited it didn't even match the topographic overlays correctly. You can see where they spliced it in." I sighed. I've seen better forgeries from amateur trust fund fraudsters. Jessica hesitated. "You thinking of filing counterclaims?" I didn't answer right away. My eyes were on the security monitor mounted over the kitchen table. The western gate had just popped up on the screen, another SUV idling by the chain like it was waiting for divine permission to trespass. "I'm not there yet," I said, "but I'm getting real damn close." She laughed. "Let me know if you want backup. I'll come down and tear them apart pro bono just for the entertainment." I spent the rest of the day assembling my defense. I printed out layered maps, official ones, and highlighted every point of discrepancy between my parcel and their fantasy. I dug up photos of the generator install, copies of the invoices, and the permits from the county engineer's office. I backed up my security footage going back 2 months, just in case. Everything went into a hard case, labeled and indexed. That evening, I sat out on the porch again, boots up, a scotch in my hand, sun dipping behind the ridge. All seemed calm, but I'd been through enough litigation in my life to recognize the scent of escalation. And this wasn't going to end with some HOA weasel shaking my hand and walking away. The gauntlet was down. The war, absurd as it was, had officially begun. The courthouse in our county isn't much to look at, a squat brick box that smells like old air conditioning and sealed records. But I'd argued enough cases in buildings just like it to know appearances didn't matter. What mattered was what you walked in with. And I wasn't coming in with theories or feelings. I came with receipts, maps, time-stamped footage, and a professional disdain for legal nonsense dressed up as civic concern. The morning of the hearing, I wore a simple gray suit, no tie. Let them think I was underdressed. Let them think I was underestimating them. Karen Welch arrived like she was chairing a corporate board meeting. Power red blazer, gold pin, hair styled to the millimeter. Her legal team, 2 suited men I didn't recognize, walked behind her like political aides. She looked at me once across the hallway and smiled like she was already framing my land for her next community brochure. We were called in promptly. The judge, an older man named Hammond with a sharp tone and no patience for procedural games, asked both sides to present opening remarks. Karen's attorney, one of those smooth-talking types who probably practiced his smirk in the mirror, presented the HOA's position. He used words like legacy expectations, visual flow, and communal synergy. I kept a straight face, but it was a struggle. Then he dropped the big one, that a shared shoreline corridor had long been understood to exist along the southwest quadrant of the Boyer property, as evidenced by historical planning maps. Then it was my turn. "Your Honor," I said, "there is no historical easement, no deeded access, no recorded agreement, no precedent, and no legal right. There is, however, a forged document attached to this complaint, and I've brought authenticated records to prove it." That got Hammond's attention. I handed the clerk 3 certified maps from the county recorder's office, each showing the boundary as it had existed unchanged since the 1940s. Then I showed the so-called easement map submitted by the HOA, pointing out the mismatched fonts, the blurry survey lines, and the out-of-date legend markings. And finally, I said, "Here's a notarized letter from the original surveyor of Hickory View Estates confirming that no portion of their plan ever included or anticipated access through my land." The judge gave Karen's attorney a long, unimpressed look. "Do you have an explanation for these discrepancies?" The lawyer glanced at Karen, who suddenly found something fascinating on the floor. "Well," he said, "our documentation was provided by the HOA based on materials they believed to be authentic at the time of filing." "Believed to be won't hold up in my courtroom," Hammond snapped. "Especially if those materials turn out to be fabricated." Karen blurted, "We wouldn't need to be here if Mr. Boyer wasn't so defensive. What's he hiding behind that fence?" There was a brief silence. Then the judge said coldly, "Ms. Welch, this is not a town hall meeting. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." Her lawyer looked like he was praying for the floor to open up beneath them. The judge adjourned for a short recess, pending review of the evidence I submitted. I stepped outside the courtroom with my folder under my arm, past Karen without a glance, and got a fresh coffee from the vending machine down the hall. Back in session, the judge issued a temporary injunction. The HOA was prohibited from entering or interfering with my property pending final determination. The case wasn't dismissed yet, but the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. And Karen. She wouldn't even look in my direction. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But the first shot had landed, and I was still standing. The courtroom clash was only the beginning. Once I'd landed that first punch, I knew Karen wouldn't retreat quietly. People like her never do. They double down, get creative, find new angles. and I was ready for it. What I wasn't expecting was just how far she'd already gone behind the scenes. I spent the next day pulling more threads. I wasn't interested in just defending myself. I wanted to know where this fake map had come from, who had touched it, who had approved it. A forgery that sloppy doesn't materialize on its own. Someone built it, and someone signed off on it. I called in a favor from an old contact, Liam Wilkes, a former federal marshal turned private investigator who'd developed a particular skill for sniffing out document fraud. I sent him everything: the fake easement map, the meeting notes attached to the lawsuit, the digital file metadata. I didn't expect him to find much. I thought maybe he'd turn up an intern who'd pulled a wrong file, maybe an HOA clerk who'd misdated a survey. But Liam called me 3 days later with something better. "David," he said, "you're going to want to sit down for this one. That map you got." It wasn't just copied from old records. It was created from scratch on a desktop in the HOA's office 6 months ago. I found the original file on a cloud drive tied to Karen Welch's personal login. I let that sink in. "Created?" I asked. "Not edited? Fabricated?" Full-on custom job. I pulled the document history. She even labeled it Revised Access Plan, Final Draft. It's her work, no doubt about it. It was the break I'd been waiting for. Proof of deliberate fraud, not just a misinterpretation or accidental misfiling. Liam wasn't finished. I've also got screenshots from the HOA's internal chat system. She's been leading the charge, telling board members to create a sense of historical expectation about the access trail. I almost laughed. That's a long-winded way of saying lie. "Oh, it gets better," Liam continued. "You know those tours Hickory View's been giving to prospective buyers? The ones with the future shoreline trail that cuts across your land? Yeah, I've seen the signs. She's been charging them $200 a head for private showings. Collected over 12 grand in the past few months." That stopped me cold. "She's profiting off a lie," I muttered. "Off my land." "And here's the kicker," Liam said. "One of the former HOA board members who quit last year. He left because he caught her doctoring the maps. I tracked him down. He's willing to testify." I spent the evening sorting the files Liam had sent me. Screenshots, metadata logs, payment records, statements from the ex-board member. I labeled each piece like I was prepping an FBI case file, because in my mind, that's exactly what this was. By morning, I had a complete package ready to hand over to the court. But before I filed, I took one extra step. I drafted a formal complaint to the county district attorney's office, attaching evidence of document fraud, false filings, and financial misrepresentation. This wasn't just a civil matter anymore. I wanted criminal eyes on this. When I dropped off the complaint at the DA's office, the clerk at the counter raised an eyebrow as she scanned the summary. "Looks like you've got them dead to rights," she said. "I know," I replied. "I just want to make sure the system does too." By the end of the week, the courthouse had received my supplemental filing. The DA's office had opened a preliminary inquiry, and the walls around Karen's story were starting to crumble. It wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was fraud. It was theft. It was deliberate misrepresentation. And now, it was war. It happened just after midnight. The cameras caught it first. Thermal flashes by the south fence line, then 3 figures slipping through the trees just outside the floodlight zone. They were moving low, fast, and stupid. The moment the alert pinged my phone, I was already out of bed, pulling on jeans and grabbing the 12 gauge from the gun safe by the door. I didn't aim to shoot anyone, but I wasn't about to meet nighttime trespassers unarmed on 180 acres of dark Texas hill country. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the motion lights had kicked on along the south trail. I flipped the yard lights manually and watched the brush near the generator shed snap and shimmer with movement. Someone tried to duck behind the propane tank. Another tripped on a root and swore, loudly. I chambered around. The sound alone was enough to freeze them. "Hands where I can see them," I called out, loud and calm. "This is private property. You're being recorded. Stay still or stay stupid. Your call." 2 of them bolted. One ran south toward the ravine. He'd regret that choice once he hit the cactus patch. And the other disappeared west toward the old cattle fence. But the third one, she stepped out slowly from behind the shed like she was on a damn safari. Karen Welch. She was wearing hiking boots, black pants, a zip-up vest, and a smugness that defied logic. "David," she said, brushing herself off, "we were just conducting a site review." I laughed once, dry and sharp. "At 1 in the morning?" "We had to see the elevation changes before presenting to the committee," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "And we didn't want to disturb your daily routine. Karen, you're trespassing on private land. Again, with two accomplices who just ran. That's not a review. That's criminal trespass." Her expression hardened. "If you have nothing to hide, why are you reacting so aggressively?" I raised my phone. "Say that again for the recording." She didn't. 10 minutes later, the sheriff's deputy arrived, Sam Holloway, a no-nonsense ranch kid turned lawman. We'd known each other for years, and he didn't even pretend to be surprised. I played him the camera footage, 3 figures entering at 12:08 a.m. through the south fence. One clearly Karen, the others unidentifiable but clearly not local wildlife. "Jesus," Sam muttered, rubbing his forehead. "They really think this is just theirs, huh?" "She called it a site review," I said. He chuckled once. "They're gonna love hearing that in the incident report." Karen stood beside her black Range Rover, arms crossed, saying nothing now. Sam approached her, pulled out a clipboard, and began the formalities. "I'm issuing a citation for criminal trespass," he said. "You'll also be served with a no-contact order pending the outcome of your civil case. You're to stay at least 300 yards away from Mr. Boyer's property line. Violate that, and we'll move to arrest." Karen tried to protest, but her lawyer wasn't there to rescue her this time. Sam kept writing. I watched her expression turn from irritation to calculation to cold fury. After the patrol car disappeared into the darkness, I walked back to the porch and sat down. My floodlights were still on, casting hard shadows across the dirt. My dog came up from the barn trail, tail low, ears perked. He'd seen the commotion too. I gave him a scratch and muttered, "That's one hell of a site review." Inside, I updated my files, added the new footage, copied the audio from my porch mic. I printed the citation report once it came through, clipped it to the growing stack in the red folder marked Hickory View Incidents. They'd crossed the line, literally and legally. And now the courts weren't the only ones watching. 2 days after the midnight stunt, things started to unravel for Karen faster than I expected. Not for lack of trying on her part, she was still clinging to control, but the cracks were starting to show. And this time, they were coming from inside her own little kingdom. It started with a letter, not to me, but to the County Board of Oversight, sent anonymously by a resident of Hickory View Estates. The letter was short, direct, and devastating. It accused Karen of using HOA funds to finance unauthorized legal actions against non-members, specifically me. It also claimed she'd unilaterally increased membership dues through an obscure vote clause buried in the quarterly newsletter, without proper notice, quorum, or recorded minutes. The letter didn't just ask for an audit, it demanded one. Then the calls started. One by one, homeowners from the development began reaching out. Some left voicemails, some emailed. A few showed up at the gate, careful to stay on the public side of the road. "Mr. Boyer," one said, "we didn't know she was going this far. We just thought it was about the trail." Another added, "They told us you were aggressive, that you had blocked shared access. We didn't know there was never any legal access to begin with." I kept every message, not out of spite, but because I knew where this was heading, and the more testimony, the better. Then came the real gift. A man named Bill Connors, one of the former board members who'd quietly resigned months earlier, reached out. We met at a diner off Highway 281, far from the HOA's line of sight. "She forged that map," he told me, voice low but firm. "I saw the original. It didn't have the access trail. Karen added it after I stepped down." "Why step down at all?" I asked. "She was rewriting rules, spending money without votes. I figured she'd crash the whole thing eventually. But I didn't expect she'd drag in someone like you." He gave me a flash drive, internal meeting notes, redlined maps, emails between Karen and a consulting firm she'd hired without disclosure. By the end of that week, I had a stack of evidence showing that her HOA was not just overreaching, it was imploding. Karen had built her authority on control and secrecy. Now both were slipping. Her neighbors were no longer whispering. They were organizing, and I was holding the receipts. The courtroom was different this time, not just in atmosphere, but in tension. There was a weight to it now, like everyone finally understood that this wasn't just a petty land squabble. Karen sat with a different lawyer, younger and nervous-looking, glancing often toward the bench as if expecting rescue. Her usual confidence had eroded. She wasn't making eye contact, not with me, not with the crowd. And yes, there was a crowd. Half of Hickory View estates seemed to have shown up, sitting behind her, but the whispers weren't in her favor anymore. The judge opened proceedings by addressing the matter of the forged zoning document I had submitted into evidence last week. He'd had time to review the metadata, the expert report from Liam Wilkes, and the old county records that clearly contradicted the HOA's submission. It wasn't subtle. It was fraud. Karen's attorney tried to deflect, claiming that she had relied in good faith on documents passed down from previous board members. I watched the judge's expression flatten. "Counsel," he said, "are you suggesting your client submitted a document she never read, marked final draft with her own digital signature?" The silence was deafening. Then I was called to the stand. I laid it out in order. The original parcel records, the metadata analysis showing file creation from Karen's HOA account, the chat transcripts where she told her board to create expectations and prepare the community for a unified shoreline. I also presented photos of the fake tours, signs, printed flyers, even payment confirmations tied to her personal Venmo account. The jury, because yes, Karen had insisted on a jury, looked increasingly disgusted. A few members of the gallery gasped when I displayed the invoice showing $12,000 collected from hopeful new buyers. All promised a planned easement trail through my ranch. Then it happened. Midway through cross-examination, Karen lost it. "He's exaggerating," she snapped, standing up suddenly. "He's paranoid. He's sitting on land that should have been part of our development from the start. Everyone knows it." Her lawyer tugged at her sleeve, whispering frantically. The judge banged the gavel and warned her, but she kept going. "You think just because he's got cameras and files and a smug look on his face, he's the victim? He's hoarding the best shoreline in the county and calling it privacy." Her voice cracked on the word. That did it. The judge declared a recess and had her escorted out by court security to cool off. Her lawyer followed, pale as chalk. The gallery murmured, and one of the jurors shook their head slowly, like someone watching a structure collapse in real time. Outside the courtroom, I sat alone on a bench, sipping lukewarm coffee from a vending machine cup. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet, but I could feel it in the air. She'd lost control. In front of a judge, in front of her neighbors, and the jury had seen every second of it. It took less than 40 minutes for the jury to reach a verdict. When we reconvened, the courtroom had shifted. The air was thicker, quieter. Karen sat stiffly beside her lawyer, arms crossed so tightly it looked like she was holding herself together by force. She hadn't said a word since her outburst the day before. Even her eyes had changed. Less righteous fire, more cornered animal. The jury foreman stood. "We find in favor of the defendant, Mr. David Boyer, on all counts." We further find that the plaintiff, Hickory View Estates HOA, engaged in willful misrepresentation and fraudulent conduct. The judge didn't waste time. He ordered the immediate invalidation of the HOA's claims, and then he addressed Karen directly. "Ms. Welch, this court finds your actions to be deceptive, coercive, and a violation of both civil and criminal statutes. You knowingly submitted falsified documents, misled prospective homebuyers, and abused your authority as HOA president. As such, I am referring your case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution." Karen visibly flinched. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something, but she didn't react. Not even when the judge continued. In addition, the court awards Mr. Boyer $80,000 in damages, $30,000 for legal expenses, $20,000 for property interference, and $30,000 for reputational harm. You, Ms. Welch, are personally liable. The HOA's insurer is not obligated to cover fraudulent acts committed with intent. You could hear a pin drop in that room. And then the judge dropped the final blow. Pending the outcome of the criminal investigation, you are hereby removed from your position as HOA president. A special master will be appointed to oversee the organization's affairs during audit and transition. It was quiet when the gavel hit, but the buzz started before I even stepped out of the courtroom. Outside, news crews were waiting. Apparently, word had spread. HOA president found guilty of fraud, they would title it. I gave a short, simple statement. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. A few Hickory View residents came up afterward. Some shook my hand. Some apologized for believing the narrative they'd been fed. One man, clearly rattled, said, "We didn't know she went that far. We just thought you were being difficult." I nodded. Now you know. By the next morning, the HOA's insurer had terminated its policy. The board was in shambles. 3 members resigned within hours. Residents were talking about a collective lawsuit to recoup the dues they'd lost on Karen's schemes. I didn't chase any of it. I had what I wanted, my land, my name cleared, and her booted from every inch of authority. I went home, locked the gate, poured myself a drink, and filed the last of the paperwork into a folder marked closed. The wind felt different that morning, sharper, cleaner, like the land itself had exhaled. A week had passed since the verdict, and I finally had the bandwidth to handle one last piece of unfinished business. There was a narrow strip of land, a few acres right on the southern border, the same land Karen's trail was supposed to run through. Technically, it had always belonged to an elderly rancher who leased grazing rights to a neighboring parcel. But after the trial, he called me directly. "David," he said, "you want it? I'm too old to deal with survey flags and HOA folks sniffing around my fence line." 2 days later, the deed was mine. I walked the new line myself, boots in dirt, measuring tape in hand. It was nothing fancy, mostly mesquite and uneven slope, but it gave me something far more valuable than grass. It gave me full command of the entire southern perimeter. I'd closed the circle. I didn't stop at ownership. I hired a local contractor, good guy named Curtis, to install a double-layer fence system, 12-foot cattle panels with motion sensors, followed by a 6-foot privacy screen. The sort of thing you'd expect around a military compound or a federal evidence locker. Overkill? Probably. But after the months I'd had, I didn't mind a little overstatement. And then, just for me, I added a personal touch. Right by the new gate, I had a custom metal sign welded and bolted in place. Simple white letters on matte black steel. Private ranch. Entry will be prosecuted. HOA not welcome. But I wasn't done. On the post just beside it, I added one more sign. This one was wood, hand-carved by a local artist I knew from town. It read, "Karen, you chose the wrong neighbor." I didn't expect anyone to laugh but me. That was fine. It wasn't a joke. It was a boundary made physical, permanent, and irrefutable. Over the next few days, I started getting a different kind of visitor. Hickory View residents, now ex-supporters of Karen, would park just outside the new fence line and stare at the signs. Some took pictures. A few left quietly. One man, middle-aged, in HOA branded polo, stood there for 10 solid minutes before shaking his head and walking off like a man whose religion had collapsed. The land was quiet again, not just physically, but spiritually. No more clipboard inspections, no more SUV motorcades, no more site visits in the dead of night. The place was finally mine again. Summer rolled in hotter than usual that year, the kind of heat that sticks to your bones and makes you think twice before stepping off the porch. But for the first time in months, I didn't mind the stillness. I wasn't waiting for another letter, another SUV, another stunt from an entitled HOA president with a God complex. It was just me, the land, and the quiet. News of the court decision had made its rounds. A few local news outlets picked it up, and a property rights blog out of Austin ran a headline that made me chuckle. "Retired attorney eviscerates HOA in fraud lawsuit. Neighbor now unwelcome forever." I got a call from an advocacy group not long after Landowners United. They'd read about the case and asked if I'd consider speaking at one of their conferences in Houston. I politely declined. I didn't fight this for attention. I fought it because someone tried to take what wasn't theirs and thought I'd roll over because they had a committee. But not all outreach was unwelcome. One morning, a man named Joel Chambers showed up at my gate. HOA member, former ally of Karen. He stood awkwardly on the county road shoulder, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I owe you an apology," he said when I approached. I believed her. We all did. I didn't say anything. Joel looked down, then back up. "I never thought someone could weaponize community like that. She made us think you were the threat." "You know better now," I said. He nodded. "We've got a new interim board. No president yet. People want change. Real change. They want to fix things." I gave a small shrug. "That's your fight. Mine's over." Before he left, he looked toward the sign I'd posted. "Karen, you chose the wrong neighbor." He gave a dry chuckle. "She's moved. Put her house up for sale last week. Rumor is she's heading to Arizona. Can't show her face here anymore." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. As the days passed, the HOA restructured slowly, carefully. I heard from town contacts that residents had started removing some of the more ridiculous bylaws, restrictions on fence height, mailbox colors, garden gnomes. People were speaking up for the first time in years. Some cited my case as the spark. Funny How that works. One afternoon in late July, I was sitting on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sun drop behind the ridgeline, when a dust trail rose up from the county road. I leaned forward. For a second, I thought it might be another HOA visitor, but it wasn't. It was Karen. She parked just outside the gate, stepped out slowly. No SUV convoy, no clipboard. Just her, smaller than I remembered. She didn't approach the gate. She stood on the other side, hands folded in front of her. And then, softly, she said, "I'm sorry." I didn't move. I lost sight of what I was supposed to do. I thought I was protecting something, but all I did was make enemies. Her voice caught. I was wrong. The silence stretched. Eventually I said, "That land never belonged to you. Not on a map. Not in spirit." "I know," she said. "Now I do." She turned to go. "Karen," I called out. She paused. "The barbecue's next weekend. If you want to come, bring something besides an agenda." She blinked, surprised, then gave a nod, the smallest one imaginable, and drove off. I sat back in my chair. The gate stayed closed. The land stayed quiet. But for the first time in a long while, it finally felt like home again.